Hi, welcome everyone to today's ODI Friday's lecture. Today Nick Bearman is here and he's come all the way from Cornwall to join us. Nick works for Clear Mapping Co. and basically what they've done is they've taken data from Liverpool University and they've turned it into an interactive map. So Nick's going to be talking to us about that today. Just two things for you to note. First thing is that we're live streaming, so if you've got any questions in the room, please wait till the end and then we can pass you the mic and people at home can hear you. And finally, if you've got any questions or answers, whether you're here or watching online, please use hashtag ODI Fridays and we'll read them out. Over to you, Nick. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, I'm Dr. Nick Bearman. Thank you very much for watching today. I'm going to talk to you about the PopChange project. So this was a project I was involved with two hats on. Firstly, with the University of Liverpool in the Department of Geography and Planning there as a postdoc researcher where we generated the resource. And then at Clear Mapping Company where we generated the front end, so the interface that we have to use this data. So just to start, kind of why are we doing this? So why is it important to make census data more accessible? And I'm probably going to spend about 2/3 of the time on the why and then about 1/3 on the kind of how aspect. And there's a few technical details, but I won't go into too much detail. But if you want me to expand on more, we can do that at the end with the questions. So I think it's quite fair to say that the census is a very powerful set of data and it provides a very useful range of data. So we can look at unpaid care, which we've got up here, or we can look at workday locations as opposed to home locations. And there's a whole range of different aspects we can look at with the census data, whether it be tables, graphs, maps, a whole range of data sources that is really useful. But the census data is quite hard to access, I would say. Fortunately, we don't have to go back to the paper records like this for the census from 1971 onwards. But the websites that we use to access census data, they're very comprehensive, but as a result, I would say they're relatively complex to use. So one of the more common ones is one called CASWeb, which has got census data for the UK from 1971 to 2001, so not the latest 2011 census. And it works very well, but it's still got a little bit of a kind of late 90s, early 2000s web interface ethos. So it's fine, it does the job, but it can be quite intimidating if you're not used to dealing with this sort of data. The more recent version, done by UK Data Services, Infuse, which has got 2001 and 2011 data on it, but only for England and Wales. And it's a bit more of a kind of slick interface, and there's some more information about what the variables are and what they mean and what you can use them for. But more often than not, you end up with a list of numbers or lots of options to choose from. Scotland does their census data slightly differently. They've got a separate website for 2001, 2011. They do have quite a nice map, which you can do stuff with, which is great. But equally, you often end up scrolling through long lists of data to select what you need to select. And ultimately, you often end up with an Excel spreadsheet, so a table of numbers, really. And that's what we call current census data. If you want to go back further and look at archive data, there's not a kind of systematically digitized version of the census available pre-1971. And even the 1971, 81 and 91 data have only relatively recently been made available. There was a research project to get it digitized in a usable form on the web. It used to be in a COBOL database, if anybody's old enough to remember those. And so in that form, it wasn't very usable. So it's a lot more usable than it was. And before 1971, the data aren't systematically available in a kind of digital usable form. If you go kind of 100 years plus back, then you have the genealogy census data, and that's quite a different way of accessing it. So we wanted to make this census data easier to access, and we're particularly interested in how people can look at change over time, particularly for small areas. And the idea is that if the data is easier to access, more people will use it. So why am I spending all this time saying what the problem is? Well, at the moment, census data is made available in units called output areas. So there's about 32-ish thousand across the country, and each output area is about 100 households or so. And so these are quite small units, so they're quite detailed, which is great. But comparing these over time is quite difficult because they change, usually as a result of housing development. This is a lovely example of housing development in northwest Swindon. So this was in 2004. You see we've got kind of relatively green area, quite a few houses up in the north section. But then in 2011, just 7 years later, it's filled with housing. And there are a lot more than 100 households there. So every time you get this kind of urban growth, the output areas have to be changed to take this into account. And that means then they're different for the different censuses. A nice example of this is for Liverpool. So we've got the blue boundaries, which are 1991, what they call enumeration districts. So very similar to output areas from our point of view. And then in the red, we've got the 2011 output areas. So you can see there's very little overlap between them. If we wanted to compare what happened in, say, one of these output areas, compared to what it is now and what it was in 1991, it'd be quite difficult because the areas are so different. This is particularly a problem if you want to go from looking at any of these three data sets, 71, 81 or 91, to 2001 or 2011, because there's ONS completely redesigned how they distributed the data to a much better way, and there's lots of benefits of output areas, but it makes doing this comparison quite tricky. And there are a whole range of people who might be interested in these comparisons. So this is the kind of example from the census website to give you a bit of an idea. Government departments, great users of the census, local authorities, community groups, research and academics as well. So there's a whole range of users, some of whom who will be interested in change over time and some who won't necessarily. In terms of the people who are kind of interested in this change over time element, in the PopChange website so far, the bulk of our users are academic or researchers, and that's probably partly because it started off as an academic project. But we do have a range of users from other sectors, and these are the people we want to help with this resource to make the data more accessible. Okay, so how did we go about doing this? Well, we took most of the variables for all of the years, and I'll talk a bit more about the variables later, and we converted them into a 1 kilometre grid across Great Britain. So this grid is the same over time, so it's very easy to compare changes in this grid over time. We've got plans to do a 100-metre resolution grid for urban areas, and that's still in process at the moment. And so we've got the data, which is great, but we also wanted to make it more easily available. So we created an online resource to enable people to do comparisons. So you can see how much, say, an area's population has changed over time, how the age groups have changed over time, and so on. And the online resource allows you to select which year you're interested in, and then also which variable you're interested in. So we've got age, we've got ethnicity, country of birth, health. There's a whole range, a whole list on there. And then you select which year you want to look at the change from, so 2001, let's say, and then it'll give you a nice map. And so this is an interactive map, so you can zoom in and look at different sections, and this is looking at the proportion of the population aged 0 to 14. So in the red areas, it's increased by quite a lot, and these are the counts, so number of people, and in the blue areas, it's decreased. And so you can see we've got an increase in London, decrease in places like Liverpool, decrease in Glasgow. And it's a great way of making this data much easier to access, because you saw me go through the slides there, and doing it on the website doesn't take any longer. In order to do this, we did limit the comparisons and the number of variables that people could use online to make it more accessible, because you can either give everybody the whole data set and make a very comprehensive website, but also relatively complex, or we can limit what people can do and make it much easier to use. So the variables are limited to what we've got in the drop-down box here. And for some variables, that's fine, particularly when we look at change over time, because sometimes the census questions vary over time. Age, as an example, is quite a nice variable, because you can't really ask age in a different way over time. You know, people are 35 or 25 or whatever. The categories are the same, and these 7 categories are the same across all of the 5 census periods. Some questions do change over time, and one example is the health question. So in 2011, it was how good is your health in general? And you had the options of good, fair, or bad. And then in 2001, it was over the last 12 months, would you say your health on the whole has been, then you get to choose fairly good, good, or not good. So it's not the same question. How comparable is it? That really depends on what you want to use the data for. So we wanted to give the users of this the opportunity to make that decision, but also support them in making that decision. Not just say, they're different, go off, work it out yourself, but highlight to them the fact that it was different. So when you do the selection, if it's got one of these relationships, we'd call it, between, 2001 fairly good and 2011 good, it will come up with a little message saying that this comparison, you're comparing slightly different answers to different questions. Do you want to continue with that? Then the user's fine to say, yes, carry on, or it will probably mean they want to go away and find out exactly what it is they're comparing. And so we purposefully created this resource with a simple interface and layout. But we also do have the option to get the more detailed data if you wish, and if you want, you can download it and do your own analysis in a GIS, Geographic Information System of your choice. So along with the online map, we've got various download options here. So we can look at, it will generate a nice PDF with a map if you want that, or you can get it in various image formats. It also does it in shapefile format, or you can get the source grid data as well if you want to do your own analysis. So we wanted the resource to be simple but also flexible. And the idea of this is we hope that making the census data easy to use, more people can make use of the data, more people can look at change over time for what we call small areas in this case. So people might be interested in their local neighbourhood or their town, or that type of thing. It's also a great tool of showing how useful spatial data can be, because there's this whole census data resource that is there, but it's quite difficult to get into if you've not got years of training in GIS. And we can also show how important the census data is and why it might be better or worse than other data sources. So that's the kind of why background. I'm going to cover a little bit of the kind of how did we do it. So firstly, from a kind of academic is probably a bit strong, but the kind of how did we create the data in the first place? So we wanted to aggregate data to 1 kilometre grids, so the squares you see on the screen here. And these were from either enumeration districts or output areas, so the different shaped polygons on there. And we used the density of postcodes to get an estimate for how many people were in each area. So the blue dots on here are the postcode densities. You can see we've got various urban settlements, and then in the rural areas it's quite thinly spaced. So what we did was we have the total population for each output area, take that, then allocate that to a surface based on where the postcode densities are, and then aggregate those to the 1 kilometre grids. So take the postcodes, and we have a density grid, and then we overlay it with the output areas, work out the populations and aggregate them to the grid cell. Essentially, the population is then allocated to 1 kilometre grids based on these postcode densities. So if you've got more postcodes in one area, you get more people in that area, is our logic. The reason we use postcodes is because we have postcode centroids for all the way going back to 1981. So it's a consistent data source across the time period we're interested in. This then allows us to generate these grids for as many census variables as we want for all of the 5 time periods, so 2011 all the way back to 1971. As always, it's good to test whether our estimation actually works, and we've done some evaluation of this. Interestingly, there was a gridded output for the 1971 census for Great Britain, which is essentially what we're trying to create, but that's now a missing data set. Nobody can find it. We've searched high and low. The ONS have looked for it. A whole range of people have been looking for it. It's probably stuck on a tape drive somewhere in some academic's office, no doubt, but we can't find it. And that's one of the reasons we're creating the resource. There is gridded data for Northern Ireland. So for all the census years from 1971, they've already done this process with the source data. So that's a great example for us to compare the data for Great Britain with the data for Northern Ireland. So Northern Ireland, they structure the census a little bit differently. They have things called small areas rather than output areas. And so total population 1.8 million, and they've got 4,500 of these small areas. So this is the population density, total persons per hectare by small area. And then this is their gridded output, so what the census data tell us from Northern Ireland. And then this is our estimated method. So we use the same method I've described done for Great Britain for Northern Ireland. This is our estimated method. This is the count where we have at least one person, kind of numerically in terms of the data. We've got a threshold of 25 people because that our experiments have shown that this much more accurately represents the real world. When we look at the difference between the estimated, so based on our model, and our observed, this is the kind of output we get. Generally, it's pretty good. There are certain areas where you've got clusters of big positive or negative differences, and that's most likely due to how groups are allocated, particularly if you've got quite a high density residential area, for example, tower blocks or something like that. If the tower block falls on the wrong side of the line in our model, you'll have quite a lot of people allocated to the wrong space. And there are certain examples where you can see this, particularly around Belfast. When we do the same thing for the UK, this is the kind of overall total numbers of people we get. It's fairly as we would expect, and these are with the filters for more than or equal to 25 people. One of the advantages of using a grid as opposed to output areas is that conceptually there are quite a few places where people don't live. You have 0 people, and so this method shows this up quite nicely. Even in the below threshold of 1 person, there's quite a lot of areas of Scotland that people don't live there, and that can be quite useful when we're looking at analysis of where people live. We did do some refinement to this population modelling. So we used a smoothing method to reallocate people to grids that were within an output area. It makes the data more like it is in reality. So just a few notes on the kind of technical side. We did the allocations of population to the grid cells and the smoothing completed in R. So R is an open source program used for a range of statistics and spatial modelling. And the source code or the code is freely available for anyone to use. It's on GitHub, and it means that if there are other people who want additional variables for the UK census, it's very easy for them to run the code for that. Or if people doing other censuses across the world want to use a similar approach to generate a gridded product, it's quite straightforward for them to do that as well. So as well as the data being well used, we wanted to make the methodology open and used as well. And so all of it, we version controlled it with Git, and it's all available on GitHub. And we made this open source to ensure that the data is available to anybody who wants to use it, and to promote future collaboration, because we've done up to 2011. We're going to have a census in 2021, and there will be other data sets that we could include in that after that. So we want it to be there for the community, if you like that, to be used. In terms of the resource itself, so the website, all the data is stored in PostgreSQL database, and the website is written in a program language called Clojure, which is based on the Java virtual machine. And we actually pulled in various bits of the QGIS desktop package using the Python extensions for that to do various calculations for the symbology. So we've made use of a lot of existing programs to put this together. So that's one of the great benefits of open source, is that you can pick out what you need and create a new resource based on all the existing materials. We also created a range of workshops and practicals related to the resource, and they're freely available as well. So this is if you want to take the data and want to do some more advanced work with it, that the website can't do. You can download the data, and we've got practicals to go through how to do different things like clipping out local authorities, re-symbolising it, and so on. The PopChange project is still kind of in development at the moment. It is officially launched, but we are running a workshop in London in conjunction with the University of Liverpool. So if you want to find out more, please do come along. It's at the University of Liverpool in London, just down the road from here, on Monday the 6th of February. And so we can, if you're interested, let us know, and we can let you know more details about that. And lastly, PopChange is a developing project. It's something we want to keep going. So if you think it might be useful for you, please have a go and do let us know what your feedback is, because we want to make sure the data is there for you to use. And in our first workshop, we had a few feedbacks about file formats and layout, and we've implemented those changes already. So we will listen to your feedback and do something about it if we can. Great. Thank you very much.
It's question time now, and if we've got any questions on the live feed, if they could use hashtag ODI Fridays, then we can call those out as part of the question asking. I'd just like to kick us off with one, if that's okay.
Please.
Are there any plans to develop the map further, like bringing in, for example, other sources of data from other places?
We do have some plans for that. The academic research project was funded for the census data and the stuff that's there already. The team at Liverpool, led by Chris Lloyd, are applying for further funding to integrate further data sources and also to apply the same principle to other censuses across the world.
Thank you. Any other questions in the room?
You said you work quite closely with the ONS to try and find that 1971 data. What have they thought about the idea of mapping onto 1 kilometre grids?
They really like the idea. They are quite supportive of the project, and they were one of the supporters when we originally did the funding application. They can definitely see the benefits of having a uniform geography over time. At one level, it's not too crucial what the geography is, but the grids are a nice kind of simple conceptually way of understanding the data, and there are a range of benefits of using grids over output areas. So we've highlighted some of the advantages of the Northern Ireland data being available in grids, and hopefully this resource will make the Great Britain data available in a similar format.
Did you have any problems? Did you have any problems about it still being anonymous or anything like that?
For our when we taken the output area data and transpose it into grids, the data are already anonymous, so there's no kind of additional concerns with relate to that. When the Northern Ireland data are created, I know the ONS there, they do a range of filtering, and they do, if there are certain variables with very low counts, they either exclude them or they swap small counts about, so you can't tell exactly where individuals are and you can't identify individuals.
And sorry, lastly, where did you choose for your origin for your 1 kilometre square grid?
It's based on the British National Grid.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hello, Tony Maguire, neighbourhood researcher. Are there plans to integrate other sources of data than the census, for example, local authority reporting?
There's certainly potential to do this. That's one of the areas that we're applying for funding for to develop the resource, and we've looked at a range of data sources that might be possible to integrate. But as it's an academic project, it's all relying on funding, as you probably well know.
I haven't quite formulated it in my head, but what about the ecological fallacy? Where does that fit in this?
That's a very good question. So just briefly, for anybody who's not sure what the ecological fallacy is, this is when we're dealing with groups of data rather than individual data points. And for the grid data, you're quite right, it is a potential issue. So not everybody in the same grid set will have the same characteristics. And that's one of the disadvantages of using aggregated data. So as long as we take that into account when using the data, that's fine. In terms of how much of an impact it has in terms of this resource, it's relatively difficult to tell because we don't have the individual level data to compare it to. So like any data sources that people use that are aggregated, it's something we need to be aware of.
Any more questions? Do you have any questions? Yeah. Twitter?
So a couple from the audience at ODI Bristol, I think, or Leeds, actually, ODI Leeds, sorry. One is, did you think about whether the postcode was residential or not?
At this stage, we have not taken into account whether the postcodes are residential or commercial. That is on our list of things to do in the future. So thank you for highlighting that. It's on the list already.
Thank you. And the second one was, would you only use it for comparing the same area over time? If you compared areas with each other, would it be a problem because the population could be so different?
If you mean in terms of comparing counts of people, there's the option to compare percentages. So we can say, as the age 0 to 14 increased by X number of percent, so we can use percentages to get around that question, and that's available on the website. So you tick a box saying percentages rather than counts. If that's not quite the question, if they could ask it again and clarify, I'll happily have another go at answering it.
Okay, thanks. Any more from the room? No? I've got a question about when you access the map, you have to create a username and login. What's the reason for having a gateway to access it?
There's no cost restriction at all. What we want to do is we want to log how many people use it. And as a part of the reporting to the ESRC, who funded the project, they want to know how many people are using it, what they're doing with the data. The only thing that gets recorded, we only ask for an email address. There is a box for a name, but you don't have to fill that in. And you don't have to tell us what you use the data for. We'd like to know, because it's always interesting to know how these data sets are used, but that's not a requirement by any means.
Thanks. Any more? No? Anna has the... Oh, yeah.
It's a very, very technical question. You sped over the slide about kernel estimation, kernel density estimation, and you said, I think it said, that was into 1 kilometre grids.
Yes.
Do those, presumably, those 1 kilometre grids synchronise with your grid system?
Yes, it is the same grid system, yes. And there are some more details on the smoothing process, so we can have a chat afterwards, or I can send you a paper on it if you're interested.
Any more? I've got another question. Any specific lessons that you've learnt from this project that you would pass on to somebody else who'd be creating or doing a similar project?
I think one of the things we thought quite a lot about before doing the project is the open nature of the project, and we decided at the beginning that we wanted to use programs or data resources that were as open as possible. So we made an active decision at the beginning to do that. And I think if you want to create a project in that way, it's best to start that at the beginning. When the University of Liverpool hired Clear Mapping to create the website resource, that was also at one of the forefronts, one of the important aspects. So that helped us choose the technology that met the requirements for that project. And I hope it will become more common in these type of academic projects to ensure that the code you write or the algorithms you develop or the resources you develop are open to ensure they're more widely used. And the research councils have given quite a push recently for open access in terms of journal articles and open data as well. And so anything we can do to facilitate that is always useful.
One of the things I found when doing Northern Ireland mapping before is that unlike the rest of the UK, there's a copyright issue with getting some of the county and super output areas, or they don't have super output areas. Did you come across any problems with any of the geographical copyright on any of those data?
For the Northern Ireland comparison, I wasn't directly involved in that, so I'm not aware that we had any issues in terms of copyright and so on. But the lead of the project, Chris Lloyd, would be better placed to answer that, so I can always let you know what he says on that.
Any more? Anna, are there any more on Twitter? No. Excellent. I think we'll draw the talk to a close. Thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you.